want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm just very excited to be moderating this panel. We've really got an excellent mix of academics, thought leaders, organizers, and we're announcing the results of a C4 deep canvas experiment in this session. And the teaser here is that the results of that experiment are positive and hold a ton of promise for us as we beat Donald Trump and continue to build a progressive future. I'm just going to frame our discussion. A lot of this discussion and the scripts that we've been using as People's Action and member groups of People's Action is rooted in the race-class narrative, which was pioneered by Anat Shenker-Osorio, who we're thrilled is joining us today. I just want to say why is the race-class narrative so important? Just talking from my personal experience in the immigrants' rights movement, just basically often as organizers, we're told to chase this mythical middle. For years, thousands of us have been organizing on comprehensive immigration reform. And we were told that immigration reform had to include immigration enforcement and money for a border wall in order to appease that mythical middle. And doing that meant we pulled punches on who we really were, on our own values. And again, we've seen the awful results of choosing that kind of language and choosing a middle that didn't really exist. And instead we gave plenty of space and policy and political space for anti-immigrant hardliners. But we're here to preach some hope because there's a different way. The good news is we can be authentically ourselves and we can win. And that's what the race-class narrative is all about. We're also here to talk about deep canvassing. It's an innovative way to connect with people on issues and elections. And just want to start sharing my screen a little bit. Also speak from some personal experience in the immigrants' rights movement as well. So first, before I intro Deep Canvas and while my computer thinks about getting to the right slide, bear with me. So just a quick glance at our agenda. We'll walk through an actual Deep Canvas script, the real one that we used. Anat will be commenting on it, talking about the race-class narrative. We'll have some brand new results from the C4 Deep Canvas experiment that we ran. And then we'll hear from the experience of an organizer who's actually been working the script. And then we'll go into some Q&A. What is deep canvassing? It's an engagement tactic that really strives to be transformational instead of transactional. It came out of the ashes of an awful loss, which was Prop 8 in California, which is an anti-gay marriage ballot measure in 2008. Organizers like Ella Barrett, who's speaking on this panel, innovated deep canvassing as a way to truly engage with voters, to address their fears, and move them to a new place. And as the slide says, it helps people make new meaning, but then act on that new meaning as well. We've been iterating since March on how to talk with people about Biden. We've been using a script and testing it on voters in 6 different battleground states: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Minnesota, and New Hampshire. And I also just want to talk a little bit about, David will also do this, just the track record that it has, that deep canvassing has. It's been used across all of these different issues. We've had experience using it on immigration and healthcare in a 501c3 experiment last fall. And we've seen all the effects on the right. Large persuasive impact, inoculates because it actually addresses people's fear rather than trying to pack more facts into people's heads. And it's been demonstrated to have lasting impact. So I want to transition to Ella here so she can present the script that the Deep Canvas team came up with. As you will see, a lot of it is based in the race class narrative. Anat will both react to the script and talk about the core elements of it. So here, Ella Barrett, she's a co-founder of the New Conversations Initiative, which trains organizers and leaders around the country on deep canvassing. Anat is, of course, the founder and the principal of ASO Communications. She's one of the leading progressive communicators and thought leaders of our time. She'll be in conversation with Ella as we go through the script. Ella.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mehrdad. Really appreciate it. So yeah, we have been on a journey, y'all. For the last 6 months, we've been trying to figure out, like, can deep canvassing and the race class narrative persuade conflicted people to vote for Biden? So as Mehrdad mentioned, the script was a highly collaborative and iterative process. The folks on this panel were a huge part of it. And we iterated the script for 3 months. 15 different organizers from 8 different organizations got on the phone 3 times a week with each other to try new things, to fail, to try again, to fail, and then succeed. And what I'm going to present to you is the 27th iteration of this script. Next slide. So every deep canvas script has the same sort of 6-step structure, and this script has 6 steps. So the main sort of question that we are helping voters wrestle with in this script is, what kind of leader do we need in this moment of crisis? Who out of Trump and Biden better represents and understands my experience? So that's sort of like the big sort of question that we are helping people walk through in this script. And we start with step 1, where we ask the voter on a 1 to 10 scale, who they're thinking about voting for in this presidential election, where 1 is definitely voting for President Trump, 10 is definitely voting for Vice President Biden, and 5 is somewhere in the middle. You potentially have mixed feelings. And our goal here is to elicit the voters' real, honest opinion about what is pulling them towards Biden and what is pulling them away from Biden. And we want to surface the complexity, surface the things that are underneath their initial gut reaction. And then we move into step 2 and 3, which is all about getting out of the opinion, getting out of people's heads and into their hearts. So asking questions about the voters' real experience, the things that make them think about how they want to vote in this election that relate to what they've been through and what they hope and dream. So we share our emotional experiences and we elicit the voters' emotional experiences. And in step 2, we're asking voters about care. Are you taking care of anyone in your life? Is anyone helping take care of you? And our sort of thesis here is that if we ground the voters in the value of care, the importance of taking care of each other in this moment, we can help sort of make the case that we need a president who values care and compassion as well. And step 3, we move into personal stake stories. So we found throughout this iteration journey that we have to make the case for Joe Biden, which has been a struggle to figure out a way for canvassers to authentically share their own experiences and reasons why they're voting for Joe, and to find a credible way to make the case for Biden. And personal stake stories help us. So with voters, we are pulling out where they are struggling with healthcare, what their hopes and dreams are for healthcare, and how they are struggling to make ends meet. Because we know that Biden actually has a plan around these pieces where Trump does not. And then as canvassers, we are sharing our own personal stories about why we are voting for Biden as well. And moving on to step 4 is sort of the key unique piece of deep canvassing that I think is very different than a lot of other electoral scripts, is that we pause after that emotional story sharing and we give the voters a non-judgmental space to process their conflict. So we say, you know, after talking about this together, like, what is on your mind now? On the one hand, I've heard you express that you're worried about Biden's, you know, mental faculties, but on the other hand, you know that he's been through tough times in his life with his family and losing his son and wife, and perhaps you have some mixed feelings. And this is just a key sort of space to pause and allow the voter to really think about maybe you know, stuff that they haven't processed before, and think about what decision they want to make. And then step 5, the make the case. This is huge. As I said, we really found that we have to give voters a reason to vote for Biden, and finding a way to do that that felt really authentic has been a journey. So the race class narrative has been super helpful, and I would love for Anat to jump in and just share a little bit about, what we've learned in our journey through this process.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. And Mehrdad, thank you for the entirely too effusive introduction. The race class narrative is many people's baby, including many of you on this call. I'd be remiss to not signal in particular my colleague Ian Haney-Lopez, who literally wrote the book Dog Whistle Politics, and Heather McGee, our third anchor partner when we began the research, who was at the time the president of Demos. As you can see, this is an extraordinary bit of work that all of these folks have heroically undertaken. And I'm going to unpack the RCN bit, but before we get there, I just want to unpack a couple of other bits real fast. First of all, up front and at every moment, because of this stellar work, and kudos to Ella and her colleagues, one of the first things that's asked is, do you plan on being a voter? Intentional. We know that in the voting space, identity precedes action, and that asking people about being a voter significantly impacts their likelihood that they will actually do it. And so that may sound like weird, awkward wording. Not so. Absolutely intentional. The first story share that Ella just signaled to you, intentionally priming the positive and moving out of the familial. The actual question asked was about people in your community coming together to care for each other, trying to bring people into a space that is beyond either rugged individualism or we're family, we just look after each other, into a more social sphere. So that's what we're trying to get them to have top of mind before we interrogate them with these other thoughts and ideas. The personal stake story that Ella already talked about, how to bring it back home and now back down to what this is actually going to mean in your own lived experience, as opposed to in the abstract terms of politics, which can be hard to sort of reckon and wrestle with. The process conflict. One of the things that we know is most integral to helping people, and remember, it's difficult to be in their mindset, but people who voted for Trump, or people who still have some measure of attachment to Trump, if we go straight at Trump, then what they feel is that we're going straight at them. We have to open up the permission architecture for them to have that feeling of, I made a choice, I thought a thing, I was attached to an idea, and I have changed my mind. And there's a lot of psychology that goes underneath how you do that, but that sort of process conflict is about opening up that permission architecture. And the last thing I will say is about RCN. So RCN, in this situation, it functions for many purposes. In this particular situation around persuasion, as opposed to mobilization, which is the secondary purpose, but the focus here is persuasion, it's rooted in a recognition that politics is not solitaire, right? We don't exist in a world in which people only hear from us. And this conversation in the deep canvas is only one moment. They're going to stop the conversation and turn Fox News back on, or listen to what their uncle has to say, or listen to, whatever the stories they've heard their whole lives. And so we have to create something durable that is both a positive affirmation of what we stand for and acts as a rebuttal to what the other side is saying. If we don't have an explanation for the constant and continuous race baiting, immigrant bashing that they're hearing from the other side, then they revert back to that storyline from the other side that is an explanation purportedly for their pain. Or as I sometimes like to shorthand it, point your finger at the bad guy, not the brown guy. So what's going on with the race class narrative is that first and foremost, it's an evocation to higher order values, to a shared we that explicitly names race. It then names the problem second, as you can see in this script example, as one of deliberate division. That's what allows the listener to both understand the specific harms and horrors that are perpetrated against Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, while also understanding how those harms affect economically all of us, right? because it's basically the way that the wealthy few, they're pointing their finger with one hand and they're picking your pocket with the other. And then finally, we come back to this notion of a shared we, of cross-racial solidarity in order to essentially best the plutocrats. And that's really the architecture and the rebuttal.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anat. And what I would just add is in the make the case section, this piece of, starting with the division sort of grounds the voter and helps them like open up in a different way for us to actually talk about how Biden is different than Trump in this way. And that, what we've found that's also sort of new learning for us is that talking about Biden's sort of what he's accomplished as a politician is not helping us. That talking about him as a working class person, someone who has gone through really difficult times in his family, is something that voters can really, who are feeling conflicted about the political system as overall, can start to identify with Biden in a certain way. So this sort of this sort of dual make the case of the race class narrative and then bringing it home to Biden and who he is has been super impactful.
Ella, is there one more section of the script?
Yeah, there's one more slide, one more section. So after we make the case, we ask the final rating. So this is, the same exact question we asked at the beginning of the script, and asking this final rating, where do you put yourself on that same 1 to 10 scale, allows the voter just to reevaluate and reassess, what they've thought over the last 20 minutes of the conversation, and reevaluate if they're coming down on a new number. And that is the script.
All right, fantastic. I just want to quickly mention, so thank you, first and foremost, to Ella and Anat. Also want to mention that Anat mentioned her colleague Ian Haney-Lopez, who will be doing a training about race and class today at 4 p.m. Eastern as part of Netroots. So that's 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. So great. So we've seen this script that went through 23 iterations, and folks are probably wondering, all right, so does this actually move voters? And we're excited to be joined by David Brockman, who's really one of the preeminent researchers of Deep Canvas and Persuasion, to present those results for identification purposes only. He's a professor of political science at UC Berkeley. David.
Great. Thank you so much, Mehrdad and Anat and Ella and everybody involved in this project. So I'm going to get to the fun science part to show you that this stuff really works and how we know that. So if you hop to the next slide. Yes, so the good news is that these calls actually do work. Everything you've been hearing about, we have really solid evidence to back it up. And if you go to the next slide, I also wanted to back up first, though, and give a little bit of the context of why is it that we would want to spend so much time developing a deep canvas script and measuring it. And the background is just all the evidence we have from other tests that we've done, in this case, co-authoring with my colleague Josh Calla, who's at Yale, wearing our academic C3 hats, where we've done a bunch of work on deep canvassing and how it changes people's minds towards issues and towards different groups and reduces their prejudice. So an example of one test that we did with People's Action last year. It was done in 3 states. One of the main focuses was these personal conversations where People's Action was trying to get voters to support including undocumented immigrants in Medicaid. If you rewind back to 2019, this was supposed to be like Trump's big wedge issue that Trump thought, all right, well, we've got everyone with us on this, but actually the margin of support on that policy, including undocumented immigrants in Medicaid, People's Action improved the margin of support among those they had completed conversations with by 20 points, which is just like a gargantuan effect when it comes to persuasion. I mean, there's just nothing else anywhere in that neighborhood you see in the real world. And if you go to the next slide, that's the kind of the biggest deep canvas result we've seen to date, but we've measured a lot of these kinds of programs in really rigorous randomized controlled trials on everything from including transgender people in non-discrimination laws to allowing undocumented immigrants to have access to in-state tuition for colleges. And across these experiments, we just consistently find deep canvassing having these big effects along lots of different policies over the last few years. So that was the kind of background, just to say, well, we've really, and I want to especially, again, shout out to Ella Barrett here, who's on the call, who was part of every single one of these programs, and we're getting better and better over time. We wanted to say all of this that's been learned over the last few years, can we apply it to this huge challenge of trying to beat Trump? So putting back on our non-C3 hats, our C4 hats, that's what this project was about, and I think why we were also excited about it, but also why we thought it would be a big challenge. So if you go to the next slide. One last thing, actually, I should say about these results is that in all those previous tests, we also found that all these effects lasted. It's just a huge challenge with a lot of other forms of communication that if you want to be doing something, say in mid-August, for example, to influence an election in November, a lot of other tactics we have, they might have effects, but those effects tend to decay. People, by the time you get to election day, won't be persuaded anymore, that will have forgotten. But all these different deep canvas programs I've shown you have had effects that last. So this is the kind of power we wanted to harness. However, we also knew it would be difficult. So this is some data from the Analyst Institute showing that if you look in ballot measure contests, in ballot measures, the average effect of different persuasive interventions is about 2.7 percentage points. That's much lower than the 20 percentage point effect of the People's Action Deep Canvas. But compare that 2.7 to all the way on the left side, 0.1 percentage point. That's the average effect of persuasion in the presidential race across the Analyst Institute's experiments. So more or less, we don't know how to do presidential persuasion in general. Most programs don't really seem to do anything. And so that's the challenge as well. We know that it's easier to persuade people on issues than it is in a presidential race, but we also know that deep canvassing, when it comes to issues, is much more effective than anything else. So does that extra effectiveness, can that translate to the presidential realm? As Ella mentioned and not mentioned, it wasn't easy to figure out how to apply those insights. This was something totally new, but they wrote the script and developed it together with the whole team that you saw. So we then did an evaluation of this program. As part of this evaluation, the Canvas teams, on average, had conversations that were 18 minutes long with voters. So when you're seeing that script, like, it really did involve in-depth conversation. 90% of voters who had a completed conversation actually shared a personal story. And there were 695 completed conversations in total as part of our evaluation. This evaluation took place in 6 states, Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Largely due to the vagaries of phone data and who can be reached on the phone, the universe does skew a little bit older and whiter, but also towards folks that tend to support Trump. So the next slide. So here's how we did this. We used what's called a difference in differences to conduct this evaluation. We invited lots of people to a survey that we said didn't tell them had anything to do with deep canvassing or Trump or anything else, asked them lots of questions. They filled out that survey online. We emailed them back a few weeks later. They did another survey online. So we have at 2 different time points what people think about Trump, how they're planning to vote before the calls take place. Then the People's Action tries to reach these folks on the phone. Some of them they reach, some of them they don't. And regardless of whether they're reached or not, we do a follow-up online survey 6 days later. So on average, 6 days after people are having these phone calls, we're asking them how they're planning to vote again. So if they got a call from a canvasser on a Sunday, the following Saturday, on average, they would be telling us, well, here's what I'm planning to vote for. Again, ideally not realizing that there's a connection between this survey and the calls that they got. All right, next slide. So how does this work? How are we going to use this to figure out the effect? So what I'm showing you on this graph is Biden's vote margin among the people in our evaluation who did our survey. In blue on the top left, that dot is the average Biden vote margin for the people who were reached on the phone. And in red in the bottom left is the average Biden vote margin among the people who were not reached. So it turns out that the people you can reach on the phone, they already start out a little more supportive. However, if you go to the next slide, when we look over time, so we survey them again, both groups are staying pretty constant. They're not moving too much. When we survey them again, people's views towards Trump don't change that much. However, when we go to the next slide, you see that the people that we reached after we make the calls and then survey folks again, there's no change among the people that we didn't reach, but the people we did reach are all of a sudden a lot more supportive. In particular, there's a 3.2 percentage point boost in Biden vote margin. So what that tells us is that among the people we reached, these calls increased Biden's vote margin by 3.2 percentage points. And that is a statistically significant effect. So that's really, really exciting. Next slide. And just to put that in context of the AI meta-analysis I showed you earlier, again, just to drive home the point, it is so hard to have effects in presidential races. The average effect is 0.1 percentage point, and we're at 3.2, about 30 times that. So that's super exciting. There's also some other learnings, if you go to the next slide. So you might ask, well, you know, it's hard to have lots of conversations. Like, does 3.2 percentage points really matter? And from where I'm sitting, looking at lots of different evaluations this cycle, lots of different attempts to try to defeat Trump, it really does. At the cost per conversation, it works out to about $454 per net Democratic vote, which is pretty cost competitive. And if you just think about the potential impact here of, think about if all of the volunteers from People's Action and other organizations have these kinds of conversations with folks. Imagine, for example, we're able to have 2 million conversations with all the folks calling in from California, all the People's Action staff. That would net Biden at these effects 65,000 votes, which is about the size of Trump's win margin in the 3 key states in 2016. So this is the kind of program, if scaled up, that actually could really have an impact in changing the outcome of the election. There's more though, it gets better. So that 3.2 percentage points is very unequally distributed. It's not every demographic is not moving the same way. In particular, we can look by party and by gender, and we see that it's actually independents and women, and in particular, independent women that are moving the most. And so that's really good news, because what that tells us is there's an audience we can focus on to take that impact of 3.2 points and make it much, much bigger. So if those 2 million calls are not just focused on all the random sample of voters, but we really focus on the group that seems like are most responsive to these conversations, we could have an impact even bigger than that, maybe double or triple the size. Just to give you a sense of next steps, I know everyone's super excited about statistics, but just so you know what's next, we are going to be diving deeper into exactly who is moving. These results are very much hot off the presses, so we'll hopefully learn more about kind of what subgroups are moving, what predicts movement. We're also doing a follow-up survey to see if these results last not just 6 days, which is already a fair amount for persuasion, but 1 month later. So those results will be coming in the future. Last, I just wanted to say thank you to People's Action and all their member groups. This was a really fun conversation to do. I feel like we've been doing this work for about 5 years, and I feel like this is the culmination of all of that to affect this really important change. The New Conversation Initiative, Ella Barrett, Steve DeLine, who have been with Deep Canvas and pushing it from the beginning, as well as Anat Shankar Astoria and Race Class Narrative Action for being such an important part of this project. And I'm, like everyone else, I'm very glad to take questions in the chat and also over email, as well as my collaborator, Josh Calla, who worked with me on this project. And with that, I will turn the mic back over.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Anat. Thank you, Ella. And big congratulations to the entire team for these amazing results. We're very, very gratified, very, very happy to be sharing all of this. I've just gotten off screen share. I know there's comments and questions which I may not have been able to see, so I'll try to address them as we move after Ma speaks to an actual discussion. So we've seen the foundations of the script, seen the results of that script. What's it like to actually use this thing and to have long conversations, 15 minutes over the phone with people who are feeling conflicted about this election, sharing stories over the phone. And I'm very, very proud that Massima Halaji is also here, and she's now one of the most experienced deep canvassers in the country. She helped lead the team on an immigration and healthcare canvas last fall in North Carolina. She's been a central part of the team that iterated those 23 versions this year for the C4 Deep Canvas Mas organizes with Down Home, North Carolina. And thanks so much for joining us, Mas.
Thank you, Mehrdad. Hello, everyone. I just am so happy to be here, and I'm going to go over, what these conversations are like and how this has impacted me as an organizer. I'm hoping that it'll be relatable in some ways to folks. So the first question that I kind of want to answer, like, what is it like in this time right now to talk to conflicted voters? So, one of the things that we really uncovered through talking to folks is that a lot of people have this hopelessness. And 60 years of fear-based messaging has really worked well to keep these people from talking to each other. A lot of conflicted voters, say, like, there's no person in my life that I can talk to about these things. And a lot of people, a lot of conflicted voters are really, like, shocked when you actually listen to them instead of just spitting talking points or arguing. And this group of voters really showed us how grave it is for us to have deep engagement with our communities, especially during this time. Election year after election year, these folks are feeling more and more alienated in our two-party system. Folks that tell us, like, I never talk to people about politics. I don't discuss these matters with people. Just this ever-growing aloneness. When we have been compassionate with them and listen to them, they're like, how can I do this for other people? Like, even if we're not agreeing, to still be able to meet them where they are really impacts people. And then just to also talk about, how giving people the space to process and feel genuinely is something that the right has not done historically. And just the deep impact of that, I can't really put into words sometimes. And just also want to talk about how this work has impacted me as an organizer. When I first started canvassing, I was just going door to door, having very transactional conversations, and I was often saddened by how much people actually wanted to talk and listen. And a lot of those times I knew that those people would join our movement if only I could talk to them for just a little bit longer, and not just a transactional manner. And really, I just want to say right now, like, we're not in the place to be having transactional conversations with our communities anymore. We have to invest in each other's emotions and in our own. And from this work, I have found that the first revolution starts within all of us. If we can't open up space for our teammates to talk to us, for us to listen to each other deeply, then we're not going to be able to do that for other people in our communities. And just to say, like, the antidote to the silence and the hopelessness that we see is to deeply listen to each other, so that we can bring people into our movement and not just bring them in temporarily for an election cycle, but to keep them engaged. The best way to do that is to connect with their emotions and lived experience.
Fantastic. Mas, want to thank you so much. We've gotten a number of questions, some of which we have tried to answer. But before we get there, I just want to express my gratitude to Mas for just bringing so much heart to the work, and making all of this real and alive. Just want to turn to some of these questions, and David, I'm not sure actually. So folks are asking effects on particular demographics,
Yes.
Black voters, Latino voters.
Yeah, sorry, I've been trying to type away and answer some of these, but yeah, there's a bunch of questions essentially to the effect of what is the racial or ethnic breakdown of the results, and I guess there's 1.5 answers to that. The one answer is that because of the states and the fact that we're intentionally targeting Trump voters, like those who don't already agree with us, the universe does skew white. And so, it's not only white voters, but that just means that the sample size of, say, any one group like Latinx voters or Black voters is just small enough that we don't have enough statistical precision to give like a really confident answer. The half answer is that with that said, and like the heavy caveat, when we have looked at the effects, it doesn't seem like there's a huge difference. But again, it's part of what's difficult is that, you know, we know that the composition of Trump voters skews very white. And so that's kind of the challenge. I saw there was also a question more about the, how it was for POC canvassers. And that's something that I'm less qualified to answer, but I would like God to turn it over to other folks on the call.
Can I just, before we go to Mas, who I think should answer that, because I think it's really important, can I just add something to David's answer about the demographic? Yeah. So this deep canvas was a particular test for a particular purpose with a particular universe. And in some ways, I would say it's the opposite of the low-hanging fruit. This was sort of, can we go into the belly of the beast and contend with the folks who we would argue are hardest to get, and do so being our authentic selves and not pulling punches and not doing some sort of colorblind economic populist nonsense where we pretend we don't care about racial justice. And so for that reason, as David rightly said, in this particular test that we are talking about today, the universe skews largely white. This kind of messaging, both the deep canvas approach of authentic, deep conversation and the race class narrative, have been tested in other experiments with principally, if not exclusively, communities of color. I chatted in a bunch of resources. You can see how RCN does just with significant samples, both in Spanish and English language, with other demographic groups, both in terms of persuasion and really more in terms of mobilization, because the task there is obviously to take our high potential voters. I refuse to call them low propensity voters because I will not make that come true, high potential voters, and see how it performs with them. It's just that wasn't the task before us. The last thing that I want to say about the demographic question, and Maz really put this beautifully, when we compare a win in 2018 in Minnesota, for example, with Wisconsin and Michigan. In Wisconsin and Michigan, we won. We won the executive seats, and that was great. And we won by the skin of our teeth. And we won through your incredible work of turning out more people. But we didn't do a lot of persuasion. Actually, in Wisconsin, for example, which happens to be my home state, the partisan gap grew in 2018. It actually became more partisan. In Minnesota, by contrast, we also won, but we won with a combination of using the race class narrative of persuasion and mobilization. And if we don't do persuasion, we don't just need to win elections. When you're the single Black family living in Minnetonka, when you're the single Black family living in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and people are treating you like garbage because we have not attended to the fact that we actually need to talk to white people and change their minds about things, what are people of color's lives like in these communities? They're not good, right? So this is about more than winning the election, although that would be sufficient. It's also about speaking authentically with people who supposedly we're supposed to write off, because it's just simply unacceptable that people of color who live in these largely white rural communities have to live under this kind of psychological and physical oppression on a daily basis. And that's also what's at play here.
Thank you, Anat. Wondering if anyone else wants to answer address the question of how is this for canvassers of color, how they interacted with the script and with the project?
I can answer that.
Great.
Yeah, like you gotta be definitely give people of color more support, just to make sure that they can stay emotionally resilient, because they do in fact experience situations where people make assumptions about their identity or just really difficult things, which actually usually results in the person like thinking about their own experiences more, in like in the past. So like to like help people like be grounded and empowered by where they came from rather than the opposite, I would say. So yeah, just like more like support is just needed.
Yeah. Ella, is there any more you want to add to this?
Yeah, I guess I just would love to speak to a little bit of what it takes to run an effective deep canvas program. And it's really different than I think a lot of other electoral organizing, that part of the structures that we have to create are healing structures and processing structures. And I want to like deeply shout out the Political Healers Project, who's been a collaborator with us in helping us figure out like what, because we experience trauma in these calls, right? Like we experience trauma of the voter, we experience trauma of being triggered ourselves. And we're really have been developing new ways for callers to pause, and if they've had a tough call, stop. Like we ask them to stop calling. We ask them to call one of their pod leaders or leads to actually feel those feelings in the moment, like feel what is in your body. Because we've learned through like trauma-informed practice through the Political Healers Project that we have to feel to heal. We have to feel to work through a lot of those emotions. So we spend a ton of our time on developing a culture where folks feel super comfortable being like, I had a fucked up experience and I need to like spend some time like debriefing that experience and get support from my callers. And just, yeah, our experience is that the emotional labor of this work is huge, and it's harder for, canvassers of color. And we have to be really aware of that and make sure that when we're asking canvassers of color to do this work, that they consent to being on this journey and being part of this process too. And the work is really worth it, right? Like it's there. I don't want to leave on that note, just because I think there is a ton of healing with being able to share your authentic truth with a voter who may think differently from you and have them hear you. At times it's like, with as much emotional labor and trauma that does happen in these phone calls, like just as much healing happens as well. So it's sort of a balance. And I don't know, Moss just came off mute, but anything you want to add, Moss, about the sort of healing qualities of this too?
Yeah, I mean, it's very impactful to have, a person of color on your team like tell you like, I've never been able to talk to anyone about this. Every time I felt this discomfort, I've gone away from it, and to like actually help them think about that for the first time in their life. It doesn't just change them, it changes you. And yeah, it changes your ability to lead intuitively, I would say also.
Fantastic. Thank you. I want to also note something from, and again, this is a completely different project. This is the work we were doing to measure, could we actually, notions of people's thoughts around immigration and healthcare, the 501c3 project from last fall. The thing that we were very surprised to find is we're trying to see, did it make a difference whether the person was an immigrant, whether the canvasser, and this is of course like in person, remember those days, actually knocking on doors, did it make a difference whether the person was an immigrant, a person of color, a white person born in the US? And even this was actually surprising to me, having been on doors and myself being an immigrant. And what we found was that the canvassers themselves, in terms of effect on the individual voter, and I'm going to look to David here for a second to back me up on this. I think I'm remembering this right. What the data said was that it actually did not make a difference who the canvasser was on the effect of the person. What really made the biggest effect was the story sharing about whether they knew of an immigrant and could actually and relating to an immigration story. We were very surprised to find that the canvassers themselves also thought, yeah, it really did make a difference. I'm an immigrant from Liberia and I went door to door in rural Michigan. My story had an impact. We know that happened. It actually did not make a difference who the canvasser was. David, is that correct?
Yeah, we found that in all five of the pretty bars that I showed you, those 5 experiments we've done. We basically just consistently find that regardless of whether canvassers are, so in the canvases focused on including transgender people in non-discrimination laws, whether or not the canvassers are people of color or whether or not they're transgender, immigration canvases, whether or not someone's a person of color or is an immigrant somehow in some way, shape, or form. It just doesn't seem to change the effect size as much. It's definitely not to say that if you're a canvasser who's a member of one of those groups that you might not have a different experience canvassing, or you might need to adjust how you're canvassing. But canvassers of all kinds can have effects, which I think is really good news because it shows you for all these causes, including this one, that allies can be effective.
Fantastic. I want to see if we're gonna start to close this. I want to ask our panelists to start making some just their closing comments here. There is this question around difference in efficacy of deep canvassing between calls, texts, or in person. I'm wondering if either Ella or David want to take that.
Yeah. So let me see if I can. So we've only done, so almost all of the previous tests we've done have been on doors. There's only been one test we've done so far that's been on the phones. The effects on the phones are, a tiny bit smaller. Some of that is just driven by the fact that, on the doors, it's just much more likely that people actually complete the whole conversation and stay there with you, whereas on the phones, it's a little more likely that people end up hanging up. So that's a lot of the difference. It could also be that some of the difference is just the special thing about being face-to-face. But I think a lot of it is just the simple mechanics of people stick with you longer and are engaged longer and deeper when they're on the doors. We have not done, we originally were going to do this experiment on the doors. We did not for obvious reasons. And so I don't know what this particular program would have looked like if it had been done on the doors, but had to give my best guess based on the previous tests. Probably the effects would have been a tiny bit bigger, but not hugely different.
Fantastic. All right, great. David, thank you. Let's move to just closing things. And if any of the panelists also want to take any other questions that maybe come up or maybe are still open, there's a few really provocative ones still in the Q&As, including a great one from my colleague, Brandy Brooks from Political Healers. But why don't we just go in the speaker order? So Ella, Anat, David, and then Mas.
Awesome. Sorry, I'm trying to look at the questions. Yeah, so I think my just closing thoughts are like, if there is anything we can do in our scripts and our organizing in the next 3 months, but really beyond, is shifting our scripts to allow more space to listen and allow more space to understand what is authentically happening for that voter and the conflict that they are feeling, either in their vote choice, if we're talking to a conflicted voter, or even mobilization. If folks are feeling really hopeless with this system right now, I think we need to listen and teach our canvassers to listen, slow down our conversations to allow more space for folks to process what is going on. Because it's the pandemic, right? It's like there's so many layers that folks are going through right now that just the opportunity we have to sort of help people process what they're going through is one of the most important things. So would love folks to reach out if you need more resources around how we train canvassers to do that.
I'll say two things. The first is that I think a consistent through line in research, at least that we've seen, and this is really especially acute with progressive base, which is a different universe than we've been focused on in this particular conversation, but more broadly, is that our opposition is not the opposition, it's cynicism. It's not that people don't think our ideas are right, it's that they don't think our ideas are possible. And given all that they're confronting and facing with the crises, and for people of color and Black people in particular, the compounding and very, very lengthy crises, why bother, right? I'm just trying to hold my life together. And so it's through this listening, it's through this authentic speaking that we actually create this sense that there could be a bigger we, and that in essence, the many could overtake the many if the many stand united. And if we don't give people that, it's not that they don't agree with our solutions, they do. They just find them so implausible as to not want to get involved. And then the second thing I would say, that I say frequently, is that it's not the job of a good message to say what is popular. It's the job of a good message to make popular what we need said. And that is our fixed point, and that is why we can and must win authentically telling our truths. And anyone who tells us we need to pull punches in order to win doesn't understand what it is to win, what we are trying to get done, and also just doesn't understand basic perception and persuasion. You don't win by going to the middle. You win by animating your choir to sing from the same songbook and bring the middle to you.
Thank you. David?
I know we're short on time, so I guess I'll just come back to the point that we know persuading in a presidential election is really hard. We also know that deep canvassing in a lot of other contexts have had effects that no other tactic has been able to have. And so I think what I'm really excited about, and also feel like we all have a responsibility now going forward to do, is to make sure that we can have as many of these conversations as possible that are still as high quality as possible, and make sure that all the folks out there who are, so angry or saddened by what they're seeing happen in the world have something constructive to do where they can have conversations that they really feel like are meaningful and also know that they're contributing to trying to get this guy out of office.
Thank you, David. Massimo?
Yeah, I just want to say, there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that we are more than capable of doing it. And just last thing I want to really say is if we don't listen to each other, if we don't open up space for people to just non-judgmentally exist, meet them wherever they are, which may be not a very good place right now, the right and the other people that have other antidotes to that will give them those antidotes, especially in rural places. So just to say, can't stop. And I hope that everyone that's on today with us, I hope that you guys get the resources you need. Feel free to reach out if you need anything, please.
Thank you so much, Mas. Oh my God, this has been amazing. Just want to briefly share some, just a couple of resources that are available at Netroots itself. The two co-founders of New Conversations Initiative, Ella Barrett and Steve DeLine, are going to be running a training on Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern, Proven Persuasion, where you'll be able to actually dig in and actually try some of these skills in terms of how to win this fall and far beyond. So that's this Saturday. And then on the screen, if you want to learn more about around race class narrative, there's ASO Communications website. Just if you really want to geek out even more on Deep Canvas training, Ella's email is there. If folks want to get involved, or if you just got other questions around the application of Deep Canvassing, my email is there. If you want to get involved in volunteer efforts and actually applying this in all the swing states possible around the country, you should get in touch with me, and my email is there. Just want to mainly give just a note of deep gratitude to all of our panelists. And what was exciting about this for me is, especially as someone who's been organizing for 20 years, is I wish we had both the race class narrative and deep canvassing as important tools and tactics 20 years ago when we started, because what both of them and both of them together, fused together, allows us to move from the politics of cynicism to the politics of hope, where, as Brandy Brooks said themselves in the chat, allows us to move and actually lead with our humanity. And what I love about both the race class narrative and deep canvassing is that they are just real and provides protected space for us to actually be human together rather than cold units of transactional politics, which we have seen lead again and again to defeat. And I think particularly the data that David presented demonstrates that when we lead with humanity and can have earnest conversations, it's not just a gratifying experience for ourselves and the voter, it's an actual path to victory. So just want to use that to close. this session. And again, thank you so much to all the participants and attendees. Thank you to the panelists, and have an excellent, excellent Netroots.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Nick, thank you again. Do we get booted? Uh-oh, Nick, are you there?
I think he's frozen.
Yeah. I'm gonna post the link.
Oh,
Oh,
there we go.
now you're the host. He went away.
Oh, I see. Okay. Interesting.
We're slowly getting eliminated one by one.
Yeah.
Drop in.
Not sure where we are, and this is being recorded.
Yes, we might just want to hop off.
Yeah. Let me just post. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we're I think we're still live. Let me I will post. Hold on.
It's also in our calendars, right?
It is. Yeah.
There's not a separate link. So, yeah.
Oh, there should be.
Oh, there is. Okay. Well,
Do you
let's
see it?
go away. Let's go away. And
Yep. Sounds good. Okay, great. All right. See you over there. Thanks again, everyone.